42 people at different times witnessed the kidnapping and didn't report it, because it seemed to them that the victim didn't suffer much. The abducted teenager had been drinking alcohol with gang members, watching movies, playing a console, and slept with a girl for the first time in his life. Nicholas Markowitz was even about to tell the story of his kidnapping to his grandchildren, but on August 12, 2000, his body was found without signs of life near a hiking trail in the mountains. How could such a strange story happen? What was left unsaid in the film, and why the lawyer insisted on banning it or at least postponing the premiere? I'll tell you all about it in this video. Jesse James Hollywood in the film, named Johnny Truelove, was already a crime lord in his neighborhood at the age of 19. At the same age, he bought himself a nice house in West Hills for $200,000, a black Mercedes and a sports car. So how did he come to this success?
Your son was a drug dealer?
A drug dealer? No. Did he sell a little weed? Yeah.
A little weed? He was a major supplier to the San Gabriel Valley.
Hollywood was seriously involved in baseball as a teenager, but an injury forced him to stop. However, the years he devoted to sports were not futile, and Hollywood involved his baseball teammates in his criminal business. He had good organizational skills and believed that money should be poured in from all sides. That's why he didn't limit his illegal business activities to merely drug trafficking. Once the bogus theft report for one of his cars was filed, and he was reimbursed for it by the insurance company. Of course, nobody stole his car. He just sold it in parts. Later on, this fraud will have a bad impact on him. Hollywood had a childhood friend, Benjamin Markowitz, with whom he used to play baseball. When Hollywood was on the rise, he pulled Benjamin into his group and he began to actively distribute the product. At one point, Benjamin owed Hollywood money, but he didn't pay much attention to it because it wasn't a substantial amount compared to their turnover. In addition, Benjamin believed that they were friends and therefore the debt could wait a little while, but Hollywood had a completely different opinion on this. Even though Hollywood's house was known around the neighborhood as a place of crazy hangouts, and Jesse himself and his friends regularly videotaped themselves drinking beer and smoking dope, when it came to business, Hollywood was very serious.
What's he look like?
Serious.
Hollywood ruled his gang with an iron grip and ordered those who owed him to clean up after his dogs and pick up empty beer cans around his house, so he wasn't going to play around with his friend's debt. In the film, the amount of debt is announced as $1,200, but in reality, according to different sources, the amount ranged from $2,000 to $36,000. The truth is, the only one who claims that the amount is $36,000 is Hollywood himself. Apparently, he has added compensation for all the subsequent damage that will then be inflicted on him to the original debt. Anyway, the guys get into an argument, and then Benjamin says the goods are of poor quality, which causes him problems with distribution, so he's not planning to return the money at all. The exchange of mutual pleasantries ends up in a fight, after which Benjamin and his friends start a rampage at Hollywood's house, for which he charges Benjamin a debt of $36,000. Hollywood understands that if Benjamin gets away with this, he will lose respect, which is unacceptable in this kind of business. On August 6, 2000, he takes two members of his gang, Jesse Rugg and William Skidmore, to kidnap Benjamin. This is where a series of critical coincidences begins. In reality, Benjamin wasn't as much of an addict as he is shown in the movie. Benjamin lived with his family and worked with his father, Jeff Markowitz, in their family company, but he was constantly getting into trouble and breaking the law. Benjamin was a great authority to his younger brother, Nick Markowitz, and that worried Nick's mother, Susan, because she was Nick's mother and Benjamin's stepmother. Susan insisted that Benjamin move out, and at the time of the events shown in the film, Benjamin had already been renting temporary accommodation in a roadside hotel for several weeks. On the eve of August 6th, the debtor's brother, Nick Markowitz, quarreled with his parents and ran away from home. He was walking toward his brother's house, and that's when Hollywood and his gang spotted him. In the film, this moment is not revealed, and it is shown that the gang went to Benjamin just to teach him a lesson. But later, the investigation would establish that the ringleader of the gang had originally intended to kidnap Benjamin and demand a ransom for him. Benjamin was not at home at the time, but the bandits saw Nick along the way and changed their plan, deciding to kidnap the younger brother by pushing him into the car. From that moment, the number of witnesses who had done nothing started to grow in a snowball effect. Members of the gang grabbed a prisoner in broad daylight on the street, and at least 2 people saw it, but they did not report the incident. Meanwhile, Jeff and Susan Markowitz had no idea their son had been kidnapped. For the first few hours, they thought that Nick might be with his friends. As time was passing, they became more and more worried. Shortly before the events, the parents gave Nick a pager, and as his mother would tell later, she sternly told her son, "If I call you on it, you should call me back immediately." At the beginning of the kidnapping, Nick couldn't call back, and later on he apparently just didn't want to. The thing is, at first the kidnappers tied up the victim and taped his mouth shut. Hollywood in addition described in color what they would do to the abductee if his brother failed to repay the debt, but immediately after the abduction, according to testimonies in court, the gang leader left the abductee with his associates. These associates began to treat Nick with alcohol and mind-altering substances, and Nick slowly stopped being afraid. He started being relaxed and began to treat this abduction as an interesting adventure. Within a few days, while the gang members were hanging out with Nick, they changed houses 3 times in Santa Barbara, piling up more and more witnesses, but it seemed to them that Nick was having fun rather than being kept against his will. The gang members didn't seem to know what they were doing. Quote from the investigation materials, "I mean, he really wasn't held captive in the traditional sense of the word," one of the witnesses said. "I mean, he wasn't tied up, he wasn't gagged or anything like that. Most of the time he was just playing video games." Meanwhile, Nick's father and mother were restless. Susan put together a list of all the people Nick had ever gotten in touch with, since he was born up to when he was 15 years of age. During the first day and a half after the abduction, the parents were making desperate phone calls trying to figure out what had happened to their son. After about 36 hours, they got through to Ben Markowitz. Jeff Markowitz said, "When we found out on the second day that Nicholas wasn't with Ben, we began to realize that something terrible was going on, and we immediately went to the police." Meanwhile, the kidnappers brought Nick to a new pool party. There were more than 20 new witnesses, but at that time Nick had already become relaxed and stopped feeling any threat to his safety. Moreover, there he even befriended the 17-year-old girl, Natasha Adams Young, who found the kidnapping story very romantic and even began to flirt with Nick. The Deputy Chief Sheriff of Santa Barbara County, Bruce Carell, will say later, "This kid was thinking along these lines. As soon as things are settled with the debt, they'll let me go." Bruce Carell also confirmed that witnesses had indeed heard the phrase from the kidnapped kid, "This will be a story I will tell my grandchildren." By then, however, the ringleader no longer shared his optimism. After Hollywood left Nick with his associates, he panicked and decided to find out what the consequences might be specifically for him. Unlike in the movie, he was well aware of what could and could not be discussed over the phone. So he went to the lawyer's house, who was also a friend of his family. His conversation with his lawyer is not known for certain, but what is known is that the lawyer made it clear to him that anyone directly involved in the kidnapping could get life imprisonment. Upon hearing this, Hollywood at first panicked and ran out of the lawyer's house, but then pulled himself together and developed a new plan of action. He went to a party and decided to let Nick's guard down completely by promising him that he would buy a bus ticket or even personally take him home. He even promised to give Nick some money for the inconvenience. The abductee, believing this fable, continued to hang out quietly with his new friends, for he did not know what Jesse's plans for him were. Hollywood was very nervous after the lawyer told him that Nick's kidnapping could result in a life sentence. About a day and a half after the kidnapping, Hollywood called Ryan and told him they needed to meet urgently. Ryan had a reputation in the gang as a whipping boy and was deeply in debt to Hollywood. Hollywood met him and handed him a gym bag with an automatic weapon inside. Then he ordered Hoyt to solve the problem, adding that he would clear his debt that way. Solving the problem meant making sure that no one would ever see Nick alive again. In further investigation, the police were dumbfounded by the fact that Hollywood had been able to give out murder orders so quietly. Was he a master manipulator? Was he surrounded by weak-minded children who had lost their way in life? The police subsequently concluded that it was more of a combination of these two factors. 2.5 days after the kidnapping, 3 gang members were already escorting Nick to his future grave site. When Nick began to resist, he was immediately bound and mouth taped. Then the prisoner was led to a pre-dug grave and Hoyt hit Nick in the back of his head with a shovel. Then he pulled out his weapon and fired 9 shots. The ringleader Hollywood later regretted that he hadn't supervised the process of the murder. Give a fool enough rope and he'll hang himself. The group not only dug a shallow grave that failed to fully conceal the body, but also chose a location near a popular hiking trail. After a few days, hikers discovered the body and it was subsequently identified. Susan Markowitz, Nick's mother, later recounted her emotional turmoil upon learning about her son's bullet-riddled body. She felt on the verge of vomiting and wanted to cry, but she couldn't. Shortly after Nick's body was found, a girl who had met him at a party recognized him in the obituary of a local newspaper. She immediately went to the Santa Barbara County Sheriff's Office and shared everything she knew. At the party, almost everyone was aware that Nick was being held against his will, and she even offered him an escape plan. However, Nick reassured her that everything would be fine, leading her to calm down and refrain from reporting the situation. Later, upon discovering the horrific events that had taken place, she fully cooperated with the investigation, providing all the contacts she knew. As a result, the police arrested almost everyone involved in the kidnapping, except for the ringleader, who managed to escape. While Hollywood evaded capture, 4 other young men accused of killing Nick Markowitz faced trial. Hoyt was found guilty of murder and sentenced to death. Another gang member, Jesse Rugg, got a life sentence. The remaining gang members, William Skidmore and Graham Presley, received lenient sentences for their involvement in the crime of 9 and 2 years respectively. Unfortunately, none of them had any information about Hollywood's location. 8 months after Hollywood fled, the public pressured investigators to arrest Hollywood's father. When the public questioned why the father wasn't arrested and compelled to disclose the fugitive's whereabouts, the sheriff responded, "We need concrete evidence of his assistance to Hollywood, and unfortunately we lack that kind of proof." The case gained national publicity, with the FBI circulating a nationwide wanted notice for Jesse James Hollywood and offering a reward for his capture. Additionally, the victim's parents promised a reward of $50,000 for any information leading to Hollywood's apprehension. Finally, 2 years after the murder, surveillance of Hollywood's relatives provided crucial information. It was revealed that Jesse James, assisted by his father, had crossed into Canada and then traveled to Brazil, a country known as a haven for international criminals. Hollywood had drawn inspiration from the story of train robber Ronnie Biggs, who had fathered a child in Brazil to avoid deportation. However, Hollywood failed to consider that the law had changed, rendering his plan futile. In Brazil, Hollywood impregnated a Brazilian girl named Marcia Reese, whom she knew as Michael Giroux. One day, Michael received a call from a cousin he hadn't seen in years, and they arranged to meet at a Brazilian restaurant. Unbeknownst to Michael, the Californian police had been monitoring his relatives' contacts and were passing information to the Brazilian authorities. When Michael Giroux, aka Jesse Hollywood, was arrested, his fiancée, who was 6 months pregnant at the time, was shocked and vehemently protested, believing it to be a mistake. However, she soon discovered that she was mistaken. In April 2005, Jesse James was extradited to the United States, coinciding with the completion of the filming of Alpha Dog. In reference to this, the Hollywood's lawyer managed to postpone the trial for a long time through various legal maneuvers. At the preliminary hearing, he tried to shift the focus from the defendant to the fact that the film could have negative impact on his client's sentence, and he demanded either a total ban on the film or at least a postponement of its premiere. When these arguments failed and the film did come out in 2006, the lawyer further delayed the process by carefully selecting jurors who had not seen the film or heard about the story beforehand. When with difficulty the jury was picked, the lawyer pulled a new trump card out of his sleeve. He attempted to have the chief prosecutor recused, claiming that he provided case materials to the film crew. However, this request was denied, and finally on May 15, 2009, that is 4 years after Hollywood's capture, the trial officially began. The defendant's lawyer continued to hold the defense. In his opening statement, he stated the complete innocence of his client. The defense strategy centered on 3 key arguments. Firstly, the attorney contended that it was not a kidnapping since Nick was never restrained and had the freedom to leave. Secondly, he emphasized that Hollywood had no involvement in the murder, as he was not present at the time. And thirdly, he asserted that the defendant's reaction upon learning about the murder from Hoyt was one of extreme anger. In court, the lawyer fought with great determination and gave his utmost effort, but his client faced an inevitable outcome. On July 15, 2009, Hollywood received a life sentence of imprisonment. He made several unsuccessful attempts to appeal the court's decision in the following years. At present, Hollywood and Hoyt are the only remaining individuals serving their sentences in this case. All the other gang members have already completed their sentences. Hoyt's death sentence was never carried out, and he is serving a life sentence. An interesting fact is that when Jesse Hollywood was arrested, his father Jack Hollywood was also arrested and charged with making powerful substances, but they could not prove it in court, and he received only a year and a half for possession. Thanks for watching the video to the end. I hope you had a nice time.